My brother got $500,000 from Dad's will. I got a letter that changed everything's Chapter 1. The uneven division. Have you ever felt like the universe played favorites with someone else in your family? If this story resonates with you, please subscribe. To continue this journey of family secrets, betrayal, and redemption that might just mirror parts of your own life. Your support means everything as we explore the complicated ties that bind us together. The late June heat pressed down on Charleston like a damp blanket as Daniel Foster stepped out of the air-conditioned funeral home. His blue tie felt too tight, and the jacket of his charcoal suit clung uncomfortably to his shoulders. The scent of magnolias hung in the air, sweet and cloying, a stark contrast to the bitterness rising in his chest. At 42, he'd hoped to be beyond the sting of family disappointments. Yet here he was, feeling like the overlooked 16-year-old boy all over again. "Well, that's that," said Brian, loosening his own tie with practiced ease as they stood. In the parking lot, even in grief, his younger brother maintained that effortless charisma that had always drawn people to him. At 38, Brian still carried himself with the confidence of the high school quarterback he once was. Dad would have hated all that fuss. Too many flowers. Too many people who barely knew him pretending they cared. Daniel nodded silently, watching as his brother checked his reflection in a car window, smoothing back his perfectly styled hair. They looked like different species entirely. Brian, athletic and golden-skinned, from weekends on his sailboat. Daniel, with his engineer's posture, intense blue eyes, and thoughtful demeanor that had seen too many sleepless nights lately. "You heading back to Boston tomorrow?" Brian asked, not quite making eye contact, already mentally moving on. "Haven't decided," Daniel replied, squinting against the harsh sunlight. "There's the house to deal with, Dad's things." Brian checked his watch, a Rolex, Daniel noted, wondering how his brother afforded it on a real estate agent's commission. "Yeah, about that. Melissa's got this charity thing Saturday, so I was hoping we could wrap everything up quickly. Maybe get one of those estate services to handle it." Before Daniel could respond with the irritation bubbling inside him, a voice interrupted. "Mr. Foster." Both Mr. Fosters. They turned to see Howard Gaines, their father's attorney, a stout man with thinning white hair and round spectacles that caught the sunlight. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the short walk from the air-conditioned building. "If you gentlemen have a moment," Richard requested we review the will immediately following the service. 20 minutes later, in the artificially cool conference room of Gaines, Merrick and Powell, Daniel's world tilted on its axis. "To my son Brian Foster, I leave the sum of $500,000. Howard read, his tone measured and professional despite the bombshell he was delivering. Brian's sharp intake of breath was audible. His eyes widened, then a slow smile spread across his face. $500,000. Jesus, Dad," he whispered, running a hand through his hair. "I had no idea he had that kind of money." Daniel sat perfectly still, waiting. His relationship with their father had been complicated, full of unspoken expectations and quiet disappointments, but surely Richard Foster wouldn't have left his eldest son with nothing. Not after Daniel had been the one to call weekly, to visit monthly, despite living 3 states away, to coordinate medical appointments during those final difficult months. "To my son, Daniel Foster," the attorney continued, adjusting his glasses, "I leave this letter to be opened in private." The room went silent. Daniel stared at the weathered yellow envelope the attorney slid across the polished mahogany table. His name was written in his father's distinctive handwriting, precise capital letters, slightly slanted to the right. "That's it?" Daniel finally asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "A letter." His fingers tapped an involuntary rhythm against his thigh. A nervous habit from childhood, Howard Gaines cleared his throat. "That is the entirety of your father's bequest to you, yes?" The attorney's eyes held something pity perhaps, or possibly something more complicated. "The family home and all remaining assets will be liquidated, with proceeds going to Brian as specified." Brian had the decency to look uncomfortable, shifting in his expensive suit. "Dan, I had no idea." "It's fine," Daniel cut him off, pocketing the envelope and standing abruptly. The chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "Congratulations on your windfall. I'm sure you'll put it to good use." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. Brian stood too, reaching out. "Come on, don't be like that." We can what, Brian?" Daniel turned, a lifetime of competitive resentment surfacing. "Split it." That's not what Dad wanted, apparently. He made his choice pretty clear. Howard Gaines busied himself with papers, obviously wishing to be anywhere but between the two brothers. "I didn't ask for this," Brian said, his charming facade cracking slightly. "You never had to ask for anything," Daniel replied quietly. Then turned and walked out. Charleston's historic district passed in a blur as Daniel drove. Muscle memory guiding him through streets lined with centuries-old oaks and antebellum homes. The city where he'd grown up now felt alien. Its southern charm, a veneer over complicated histories not unlike his own family. He found himself at White Point Garden, where the Ashley and Cooper rivers met the Atlantic. As a boy, he'd come here with his father to watch cargo ships, his dad quizzing him on their origins and destinations. It was before the arguments, before college and career had pulled Daniel north. Before his mother's death had left them all adrift in different ways. Sitting on a bench facing the harbor, the warm breeze ruffling his brown hair, Daniel finally removed the envelope. His fingers trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Inside was a single page, covered in the same distinctive handwriting. "Daniel, if you're reading this, I've made a terrible mistake by waiting too long. There are truths I should have shared years ago, but courage failed me. That failure has cost us both dearly. The money I've left to Brian is not favoritism, it's protection. He doesn't know what I'm about to tell you, and perhaps he never should. The choice will be yours. In the summer of 1980, before I met your mother, I was briefly involved with a woman named Eleanor Blackwood. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I was young, ambitious, and selfishly believed I wasn't ready. I walked away, and it remains my life's greatest regret. That child, my first child, was a daughter. Her name is Margot Hayes. She lives in Charleston. She doesn't know about me, about you, about any of this. Her mother kept my identity from her at my shameful request. Everything changed when your mother died. I realized life is too short for secrets. I hired a private investigator who confirmed Margot works as a legal assistant at Heron and Tate on Meeting Street. I've driven by several times, but never found the courage to approach her. There's more information in the blue lockbox in my closet. The key is taped to the back of the family photo in my study. What you do with this information is your choice. I've left Brian the money because he's never been as strong as you. This truth would destroy him, his sense of who he is. But you, Daniel, you've always faced reality head-on. No matter how painful, I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I hope someday you might understand. Dad. Daniel read the letter 3 times. The words blurring through unshed tears. The harbor breeze suddenly felt cold against his skin. A sister, a half-sister he'd never known existed. His entire family narrative rewritten in a single page. He folded the letter carefully, slipping it back into the envelope. A cargo ship sounded its horn as it headed out to sea, the sound deep and mournful. Daniel watched it go, feeling similarly unmored. In his pocket, his phone vibrated. Brian's name flashed on the screen. Daniel let it go to voicemail. Instead, he opened his map app and typed, Heron and Tate, Meeting Street. Chapter 2. The Woman. In the letter, the offices of Heron and Tate occupied the second floor of a restored Victorian building. Its brick facade, weathered by centuries of Charleston storms. Daniel sat in his rental car across the street, air conditioning blasting against the midday heat. Watching people enter and exit. Each time the door opened, he found himself holding his breath, wondering if the woman passing through might be Margot Hayes, the half-sister he'd never known existed. This is insane, he muttered to himself, gripping the steering wheel. What exactly was his plan? To walk up to a complete stranger and announce he was her long-lost brother? to append her life because his father had finally decided to unburden his conscience. His phone rang again, Brian, for the third time that morning. Daniel silenced it and checked the time, 12:15 p.m. If Margot was a legal assistant, she might step out for lunch soon, or maybe she'd brought her lunch, or maybe she wasn't even working today. Maybe this entire stakeout was as ridiculous as it felt. Just as he was about to start the car and drive away, the door to Heron and Tate opened. A woman stepped out, 40s, with wavy auburn hair that caught the sunlight. She wore a tailored navy dress and carried herself with quiet confidence. Something in her profile, the set of her jaw, perhaps, struck Daniel with an eerie familiarity. Without conscious decision, he found himself exiting the car. He crossed the street as she descended the steps to the sidewalk, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Excuse me," he called, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "Are you Margot Hayes?" She turned, startled, her remarkable brown eyes widening with surprise, then narrowing with caution. "Yes." Her tone made it a question. "Do I know you?" Up close, the resemblance was subtle, but unmistakable. Something about the arch of her eyebrows, the shape of her mouth when she frowned. Features he recognized from his own mirror, from his father's face. "No," Daniel said, suddenly aware of how bizarre this encounter must seem to her. "My name is Daniel Foster. I think we might be related." Margot's expression shifted from wariness to confusion. "I'm sorry, I don't have any relatives named Foster." She took a small step back, her hand tightening on her purse strap. "This is going to sound crazy," Daniel admitted, running a hand through his hair. A nervous gesture he'd inherited from his father, he realized with a jolt. "But I recently found out that Richard Foster, my father, who passed away last week, might have been connected to your mother, Eleanor Blackwood." The color drained from Margot's face. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For a moment, Daniel thought she might simply walk away, and who could blame her? Instead, she asked in a carefully controlled voice, "Where did you hear that name?" "From my father. In a letter he left me." Daniel hesitated, then added, "He said he knew your mother in 1980. Margot stood completely still, her eyes searching his face with newfound intensity. The busy Charleston street continued around them, tourists with maps, business people hurrying to lunch meetings, but they might as well have been alone for all the attention Daniel paid to their "I'm on my lunch break," she finally said. "There's a cafe around the corner, we can talk there." She didn't wait for his response, simply turned and began walking. The cafe was small and mercifully cool after the summer heat. They found a table in the back, away from the windows. After ordering black coffee for him, iced tea for her, they sat in loaded silence. "My mother died 3 years ago," Margot eventually said, her fingers tracing patterns on the condensation of her glass. "She never told me who my father was, just that he wasn't ready to be a parent and it was better this way." Her voice held no bitterness, just a matter-of-fact acceptance that made Daniel's chest ache. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it on multiple levels. "So Richard Foster," she continued, meeting his gaze directly. "He was your father?" "Yes. And he claimed to be my father as well." Daniel nodded, then reached into his pocket for the letter. "He left me this. You can read it if you want." Margot hesitated before taking it, as if the paper might burn her fingers. As she read, Daniel studied her face, the small furrow between her brows as she concentrated, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Gestures so ordinary yet suddenly imbued with significance. When she finished, she carefully refolded the letter. "All my life," she said quietly, "I wondered. Made up stories. Imagined scenarios." She looked up at Daniel. "Never this. Never that. He was right here in Charleston." "I didn't know either," Daniel said. "Not until yesterday." Margot took a long sip of her tea, visibly processing. "The letter mentions a brother Brian, my younger brother, your half-brother, I guess. Does he know about me?" "No. According to my father, that's why Brian got the money. Dad thought he couldn't handle knowing about you." A small, humorless smile touched Margot's lips. So you're the strong one, apparently, or the one he felt comfortable disappointing, Daniel replied. Surprising himself with the candor, their food arrived, a sandwich he'd ordered automatically and now had no appetite for. They both stared at their plates. I have a million questions, Margot said eventually. So do I. But I need to get back to work soon. She pulled a business card from her purse and wrote something on the back. This is my cell number and my home address. Maybe we could talk more tonight if you're free. Daniel took the card, noting her neat handwriting, nothing like his father's. I'd like that. As they prepared to leave, Margot paused. Your father, she said hesitantly. What was he like? Daniel considered the complex man who had raised him stern but fair. Emotionally reserved, yet capable of surprising tenderness. A man who had carried a devastating secret for decades. He was flawed, Daniel answered honestly. But he loved deeply, even when he couldn't express it well. I think he regretted not knowing you very much. Margot nodded, absorbing this. 7 o'clock tonight. I can order takeout. 7 works. I'll bring wine. They parted on the sidewalk outside, two strangers connected by blood and a dead man's confession. Both uncertain of what came next, as Daniel watched her walk back toward her office, his phone rang again. This time he answered, Hey Brian, we need to talk. Chapter 3. Shadows and light. Daniel stood on the porch of Margot's modest bungalow in the Wagoner Terrace neighborhood. A bottle of Cabernet in one hand and a storm of thoughts whirling through his mind. His conversation with Brian that afternoon had been predictably difficult. A sister, you're saying we have a sister Dad never told us about? Brian had exclaimed, his voice crackling over the phone line. That's insane, Dan. Are you sure this isn't some con artist? She didn't approach me, Brian. I approached her based on Dad's letter. Well, she's not getting any of my inheritance. That money is legally mine. The selfishness had been so typical that Daniel almost laughed. She doesn't know about the money, and I'm not planning to tell her. Good, keep it that way. Brian had paused, then added with forced casualness. So what's she like? Now, as Margot opened her front door, Daniel was still formulating an answer to that question. What was she like? He barely knew her, yet felt connected to her in ways he couldn't articulate. You found it, she said with a small smile, gesturing him inside. She'd changed from her work clothes into jeans and a simple blouse. Her auburn hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. The formality of their earlier meeting had given way to something more tentative, but also more authentic. Your directions were good, Daniel replied, handing her the wine. I hope Red is okay. Perfect. She led him through a living room filled with bookshelves and comfortable furniture into a kitchen that smelled of garlic and spices. I hope you like Thai. I ordered from a place down the street. I love Thai food. An awkward silence settled between them as Margot busied herself opening the wine, and Daniel pretended to study the collection of magnets on her refrigerator. Travel souvenirs from places like the Grand Canyon and Niagara Falls. You travel a lot, he asked, grasping for conversation. When I can. Which isn't as often as I'd like. She handed him a glass of wine. My big trip was a 2-week tour of Italy 5 years ago. Mostly work travel. Boston to San Francisco, occasionally overseas to meet with clients. Another silence, this one heavier with all the unasked questions. They carried their wine and food to a small dining table by a window overlooking a backyard garden. As they served themselves pad thai and green curry, Margot finally addressed the elephant in the room. So, she said, meeting his eyes directly. We're siblings. Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of the word. Half-siblings, technically. Tell me about your family. Our family, I guess. She took a sip of wine. I've spent my whole life being an only child, and suddenly I have 2 brothers. Daniel told her about growing up in Charleston, about their father's work as an architect, about their mother's battle with cancer when Daniel was in college and Brian in high school. He described the family dynamics, how Brian had always been the charming, athletic son who seemed to effortlessly win their father's approval, while Daniel was the serious, responsible one who worked twice as hard for half the recognition. That must have been difficult, Margot said thoughtfully. I always imagined having siblings would mean having allies, but it sounds complicated. It is. Brian and I love each other, but ... Daniel searched for the right words. We've never really understood each other. And your mother, what was she like? Kind, patient. She was an English professor at the College of Charleston. She loved poetry. She was always reciting verses around the house. The memory brought an unexpected lump to his throat. She would have loved you. Margot's eyes softened. That's a nice thing to say. It's true. Daniel hesitated, then asked, What about your mother? What was she like? A fond smile transformed Margot's face. Strong, independent. She raised me on her own while running a small bookstore. We didn't have much money, but we had each other. She traced the rim of her wineglass. She never spoke badly about my father, just said he wasn't ready for family life. I used to make up stories about who he might be. A sailor who died at sea, a secret agent, a famous musician, not an architect with a wife and 2 sons. Daniel said, quietly, No, not that. Margot's expression grew thoughtful. Did you bring the key? Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass key he'd found taped to the back of the family portrait, just as his father's letter had described. I haven't gone to the house to look for the lockbox yet. I wanted to talk to you. First, I appreciate that she studied the key. It's strange to think there's a box somewhere with information about me in it. About us, Daniel corrected gently. About our family. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and new. Shared interests in historical fiction and hiking. Debating the best beaches near Charleston, laughing over childhood mishaps. It was strange how easy it felt, how natural, to talk with this woman who was both stranger and sister. You have his smile, Margot said suddenly. When you laugh, it's the same as in those photos on your father's law firm website. I looked him up after our lunch. Daniel hadn't realized his father's smile lived on in his own face. You have his eyes, he said. The shape, I mean. And something in your expressions. It's subtle, but it's there. Margot nodded, then asked the question that had clearly been on her mind all evening. Why do you think he never contacted me? He knew where I worked. He could have introduced himself at any time. Fear, probably, Daniel said, after considering. Fear of rejection, of disrupting lives, of facing his mistake. My father was a proud man. Admitting wrongdoing didn't come easily to him. And you? What are you afraid of? The directness of her question caught him off guard. I'm afraid, he said slowly, that I'll make the same mistakes he did. That I'll let fear keep me from doing what's right. He met her gaze. That's why I'm here. I don't want to repeat his regrets. Outside, a summer storm had begun, rain pattering against the windows. Lightning flashed, illuminating Margot's face in brief, bright moments. Tomorrow, she said decisively. Let's look in that lockbox tomorrow, together. Daniel nodded, feeling something shift between them, the beginning of trust, perhaps, or family. Together, he agreed. Chapter 4. The blue lockbox. The Foster family home stood on a tree-lined street in the historic Ansonborough neighborhood. A stately Greek revival with columns and a wide front porch. As Daniel guided Margot up the front steps the following evening, he was acutely aware of how strange this must feel for her, entering the home of the father she'd never known. The life she could have been part of. It's beautiful, she said quietly, pausing to run her hand along one of the smooth columns. Dad restored it himself when I was a kid, Daniel replied, unlocking the front door. Spent weekends sanding floors and stripping paint. Brian and I were his reluctant helpers. Inside, the house was quiet and still. Preserved in that peculiar suspended animation that follows a death mail stacked on the entry table. A jacket still hanging by the door, everything waiting for a return that would never come. This feels invasive, Margot admitted as they stepped into the high-ceilinged foyer. Like I'm trespassing. You're not, Daniel assured her. You have every right to be here. He led her through the formal living room with its antique furniture and into his father's studio. Wood-paneled room, lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large mahogany desk. Family photographs crowded the surfaces. Daniel's college graduation. Brian's wedding, holiday gatherings. A framed photo of their mother in her garden. "That's Caroline, your mother?" Margot asked, picking up a silver-framed portrait. "Yes." Daniel watched as Margot studied the smiling woman in the photograph. They were married for 28 years. She was beautiful. Margot replaced the photo carefully and looked around. "So, where's this famous closet?" The closet in question was a walk-in attached to the study, lined with filing cabinets and shelves of architectural reference books. Daniel's father had been meticulous about his storage, everything labeled and organized. It took only minutes to locate the blue metal lockbox on the top shelf. Daniel carried it to the desk, where Margot waited, her expression a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "Ready?" he asked, holding up the small brass key. She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The lockbox opened with a soft click. Inside lay several manila folders, a small velvet jewelry box, and a stack of photographs bound together with a rubber band. Daniel removed them one by one, arranging them on the desk. The first folder contained legal documents, a birth certificate. For Margot Eleanor Hayes, born September 17, 1980, at Roper Hospital in Charleston. The father's name was listed as unknown. "My birthday," Margot said softly, touching the document. "He knew my birthday." The second folder held correspondence letters from a private investigator dated 2 years earlier, confirming my identity, her employment, her address. There were photocopies of newspaper clippings, Margot's high school graduation announcement, a mention of her in an article about a charity fundraiser, her name in a list of Charleston marathon finishers. "He was tracking me," she said, her voice unreadable. "He was trying to know you," Daniel suggested gently, in the only way he thought he could. The third folder was the most surprising. It contained a legal document drawn up 6 months earlier, establishing a trust fund of $250,000 in Margot's name, to be revealed upon Richard Foster's death. It had never been filed with the courts. "He did intend to leave you money," Daniel said, stunned. "I don't understand why this wasn't in the will." "Maybe he changed his mind," Margot suggested. "Or maybe he ran out of time," Daniel countered, remembering how quickly his father's health had deteriorated in those final months. The jewelry box contained a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Inside was a tiny photograph of a young Richard Foster, his face unlined, his smile carefree in a way Daniel had rarely seen in life. "This must have been from when they were together," Daniel said, passing the locket to Margot. She held it carefully, studying the young face of her biological father. "He looks happy, he does." Finally, they turned to the stack of photographs. The first few were of Eleanor Blackwood, a beautiful young woman with Margot's auburn hair and expressive eyes. Captured laughing on a beach, reading in a park, smiling at the camera with love in her eyes. "Mum," Margot whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She was so young. The next photographs were more recent surreptitious shots of Margot leaving her office building, walking through a farmer's market, jogging along the Battery. Candid moments of a life observed from a distance. The final photograph made them both catch their breath. It was a professional portrait studio shot of Eleanor holding an infant Margot, perhaps 3 months old. On the back, written in faded blue ink, "Eleanor and Margot. December 1980. "He had this all along," Margot said, tears forming in her eyes. "He knew what I looked like as a baby." Eleanor must have sent it to him, Daniel realized. She must have wanted him to know you, even if from afar. Margot brushed away tears. "All these years, I thought he didn't care enough to even know I existed, but he knew. He just ... couldn't face it." "Fear," Daniel said, quietly. "Like I told you, it makes cowards of us all sometimes." They sat in silence for a moment, the evidence of Richard Foster's secret life spread before them. Life of regret, of longing, of paths not taken. "What do we do now?" Margot finally asked. Daniel considered the question. The trust fund is legally yours. We can file the paperwork, make it official, and Brian, what will he think? Brian will be Brian, Daniel said, with a rueful smile. He'll be upset about the money at first, but he'll come around. Eventually, should we tell him about me? The question hung in the air between them. Daniel thought about his father's letter, about his belief that Brian couldn't handle the truth. Was that fair? Was it their decision to make? I think, Daniel said slowly, that secrets have cost this family enough already. The truth might be painful, but more secrets will only cause more pain in the long run. Margot nodded, gathering the photographs of her mother into a neat stack. I'd like to meet him. When he's ready, I'll talk to him tomorrow, Daniel promised. As they carefully returned the items to the lockbox, a sense of connection solidified between them, a shared history, complicated and painful, but real. They were no longer strangers bound by a letter, but siblings navigating a new reality together. Outside, the Charleston evening had settled into a gentle twilight, the sky painted in shades of lavender and gold. Cicadas hummed in the ancient oaks, a southern lullaby that had accompanied generations of foster family moments. Chapter 5. Rewritten inheritance of family secrets and emotional journeys like Daniel, Margot, and Brian's story have touched your heart. Please subscribe to our channel for more authentic stories that explore the complicated bonds of family, forgiveness, and finding truth. Your support allows us to continue creating content that resonates with life's most meaningful connections. Hit subscribe now and join our community of storytellers and listeners. 3 months later, Daniel stood in the kitchen of his newly purchased Charleston home, watching through the window as Margot helped Brian set up lawn chairs in the backyard. The September evening was pleasantly warm, the humidity of summer finally giving way to the gentler air of early fall. The scent of barbecue drifted from the grill where steaks sizzled. And nearby, a table was set for 3. The past months had been a journey none of them could have predicted. After the initial shock and anger, Brian had stormed out of Daniel's hotel room when first told about Margot. Not speaking to either of them for 2 weeks, a tentative new family dynamic had begun to form. Daniel's decision to relocate from Boston to Charleston had surprised even himself. 20 years of running from his hometown, only to return because of a letter and a sister he never knew existed. His engineering firm had been supportive of the move, allowing him to open a small satellite office and work remotely most days. The doorbell rang, pulling Daniel from his thoughts. He opened the front door to find Howard Gaines on the doorstep, leather portfolio in hand, looking more relaxed than he had at the reading of the will. Mr. Foster, good evening, the attorney said, extending his hand. Howard, please, it's just Daniel now, he replied, shaking the older man's hand. Come in, everyone's out back. As they walked through the House, a craftsman bungalow not far from Margot's home, Howard nodded approvingly. Nice place. Your father would have appreciated the woodwork. That's partly why I bought it, Daniel admitted. I could hear his voice pointing out all the original details during the showing. In the backyard, Margot looked up from her conversation with Brian and waved. Howard, right on time. The attorney's eyes crinkled with a smile. Ms. Hayes. Always prompt and like some lawyers I know. He set his portfolio on a side table and accepted the glass of iced tea Daniel offered. The 4 of them settled into chairs. An unlikely gathering connected by a dead man's secrets and a family being redefined with each passing day. I've filed all the necessary paperwork. Howard began removing documents from his portfolio. The trust fund is officially transferred to Margot's name, and the amendments to the estate distribution have been processed according to both your instructions. He passed papers to each of them. After discovering the unfiled trust document, Daniel and Brian had engaged in several difficult conversations. Eventually, they'd reached an agreement. The $500,000 left to Brian would be split. $250,000 remained his, while $250,000 would be added to Margot's trust, bringing her inheritance to the full $500,000 their father had apparently intended. I still think Dad should have just done this properly in the first place, Brian said, reviewing the documents. He looked up, catching Margot's eye. But I'm glad we sorted it out. The transformation in Brian over the past months had surprised Daniel. After his initial anger had subsided, his younger brother had approached the situation with unexpected maturity. The discovery of Margot had somehow shifted the family dynamics in ways that seemed to be healing old wounds rather than creating new ones. Your father was a complicated man, Howard observed, sipping his tea. In the end, I think he trusted his sons to do the right thing. Bold strategy, Daniel said dryly, making them all chuckle. I have one more item, Howard continued, pulling a sealed envelope from his portfolio. Richard left this with me 5 years ago, with instructions to deliver it only if certain circumstances arose. Finding Margot was one of those circumstances. He handed the envelope to Margot, who stared at it with wide eyes. Another letter. He had a thing for dramatic correspondence, Brian quipped, but his voice was gentle. Daniel turned the steaks on the grill, giving Margot a moment of privacy as she opened the envelope. The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the neighbor's fence. Mingling with the aroma of cooking food and the subtle perfume Margot always wore, that were becoming synonymous with this new chapter of his life. It's addressed to all three of us, Margot said after a moment, looking up. Should I read it aloud? Daniel and Brian exchanged a glance, then nodded. Margot cleared her throat and began, To my children. Daniel, Brian, and Margot, if you're reading this together, then something I hardly dared hope for has come to pass. The divide I created through my cowardice has somehow been bridged. There are no adequate words for the regret I carry. I robbed Margot of a father, Daniel and Brian of a sister, and all of you of the connections that should have been your birthright. I told myself I was protecting everyone by maintaining the secret, but in truth, I was protecting only myself from judgment, from the consequences of my actions, from having to face my greatest failure. What I hope you understand is that my failure was never in fathering Margot. She could only ever be a blessing to this world. My failure was in lacking the courage to acknowledge her, to bring our families together, to face the misanthropes and pain that truth sometimes requires. Daniel, you've always carried more weight than you should have. You inherited my sense of responsibility. Without my capacity for self-deception, a better combination than I managed. Brian, your light-heartedness isn't the weakness I sometimes made it out to be, but a gift this family has needed. And Margot, though I have no right to paternal pride, knowing the remarkable woman you've become has been one of my life's greatest joys. Even from a distance. The money is inconsequential. The real inheritance I hope you'll claim is each other. Family isn't just shared blood, it's shared choice, shared forgiveness, shared future. With love and more regret than I can express. Richard Foster's silence fell as Margot finished reading. In the distance, a mockingbird called, its evening song carrying across the neighborhood. Daniel turned back to the grill, blinking rapidly against unexpected tears. Well, Brian said finally, his voice slightly hoarse, he got one thing right. The money is inconsequential. Margot folded the letter carefully. Is it strange that I feel like I'm grieving someone I never met? No, Daniel replied, returning with a platter of perfectly grilled steaks. You're grieving the relationship you could have had, we all are, in different ways. Howard quietly excused himself, sensing the private nature of the moment. As Daniel walked him to the door, the attorney paused. Your father was my friend for 40 years, he said. He made mistakes, grievous ones. But, seeing this, he gestured toward the backyard, where Brian and Margot were deep in conversation. I think he'd finally feel at peace. After Howard left, the three siblings gathered around the table as evening settled into night. Lanterns cast a warm glow over their meal steaks, grilled vegetables from the farmer's market Margot frequented, fresh bread from Brian's wife's favorite bakery. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and occasional contemplative silences. I've been thinking, Brian said, as they lingered over dessert peach cobbler that was Daniel's attempt at recreating their mother's recipe. Melissa and I have been talking about starting a family. If when we have kids, I want them to know their Aunt Margot from day one. Margot's eyes glistened in the lantern light. I'd like that, and maybe, Brian continued, uncharacteristically hesitant. They could know about all of this, the whole complicated, messy truth. No more family secrets. No more secrets, Daniel agreed, raising his wineglass. Two truths, however inconvenient. Two new beginnings, Margot added. Two family, Brian finished completing the toast. Their glasses clinked in the warm Charleston night, the sound clear and hopeful. Above them, stars emerged in the deepening blue of the sky. Witnesses to this unlikely reunion of family forged not just in blood but in choice, in forgiveness, in the courage to face truth together. Daniel looked at his siblings, the brother he'd grown up with but never fully understood until now, and the sister he'd discovered too late, yet just in time. Man felt something settle in his chest. His father's letter might have initially seemed like a poor substitute for an inheritance, but as it turned out, it had given him something far more valuable than money ever could. It had given him wholeness. It had given him truth. It had given him family, not as it should have been all along, perhaps, but as it could be from this moment forward. And that, Daniel realized as laughter rose around the table and the Charleston night embraced them, was the richest inheritance of all. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more authentic family dramas that explore the complicated bonds we share. Every subscription helps us continue creating these emotional journeys that reflect the truths we all face in our own lives. Click subscribe now and join our community where we celebrate the power of forgiveness, truth, and the families we build, both those we're born into and those we choose.